real professions have professional associations.
The world is unstable. You need a ship that's going somewhere. Pick one.
The point is, I don't have the answer to the future of the profession, but we are much stronger as a group.
The experience so far has been that largely the nuttiest people in the room are usually the interpreters. I don't know why.
In Colorado, we have a Translators Association and an Interpreters Association. And one year we decided to have a joint holiday party. And the party consisted of interpreters dancing to very loud Latin music, while translators sat in the back of the room and drank wine and watched the interpreters dance.
No way, get out.
You said that. I didn't say that.
No, just you will edit out anything we say that is ridiculous, won't you?
He's given up editing out everything that I say that's ridiculous because then we wouldn't have a show left.
Hello and welcome to Troublesome Terps, the podcast about the things that keep interpreters up at night, excluding coffee. Now, this is the first in our two-part series on professional associations, and we have not one but two very special guests. But first, it's time to welcome the show connoisseur of the tablet beer, the mussels and frites from Brussels, Alexander Drexel.
Yes, hello and welcome to everyone. I'm not sure what the tablet beer thing is about, and I don't have any beer tonight, but I have a little bit of red wine. That's my confession right from the start.
I think that counts. But of course, also with us on our virtual studio floor is the only conference interpreter to fall asleep twice during his own talk, the sardonic Scotsman himself, Jonathan Downey. Jonathan, hey, how are you?
I am very, very well. I must admit the tablet beer comment was from me. My kids really enjoyed watching Alex doing his future of tablet interpreting video and enjoying a drink out of the tablet at the end. so I thought we'd just put that in. We need to drop that in the show notes. He's an aspiring interpreting comedian.
Can I just say, just ruin the outro completely and just say that this was a fun video to make, but the terrible thing was that initially the sort of the screenshot that you see when you go to the YouTube page was me drinking the beer. And I thought, no, this is probably not the best first impression. We have to change that. Then we did.
Fair enough.
I'm saying nothing about German stereotypes.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, I am Alexander Gansmar, coming to you from the magnificently mountainous Munich for this marvelously mind-boggling mission of talking about professional associations. And as we said earlier, once again, we have not one, but two very special guests on the show today. First off is the chair of the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, senior lecturer in translation studies at the University of Portsmouth, and a Spanish to English translator. Please give a warm round of applause to Sarah Griffin-Mason. Applause!
Yay, Sarah.
Hi there.
Hey, Sarah. And also with us, we have the president of the American Translators Association, French to English translator, blogger, and fellow podcaster extraordinaire, Corrine McKay. Hey, Corrine.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Applause for you.
I have a question for you straight away, Corrine, because I know that you have your own podcast together with you. Have you ever guested on another podcast before, or is this a first?
I've been a guest on Tess Whitty's Marketing Tips for Translators podcast, but not in quite a while. And then, of course, I speak a lot on the ATA podcast, but that's, sort of a different category. For you guys, I guess I could have declined the invitation. I never would have, but I guess it would have been an option. But for the ATA podcast, it's not really an option to decline. So, yeah,
fair enough.
I didn't really count the ATA podcast, which is great because it's the ATA podcast. But yeah,
right.
Of course that does count. Yeah. And what about you, Sarah? Have you ever been on a podcast before?
I don't think I have, actually. I've done some radio interviews which have gone in varying sort of degrees of awfulness, frankly, but never on a podcast, no.
You're doing great so far.
You guys are naturals.
Yes.
Not long after we finish recording this, I'm going to find out to which degree of awfulness it went at the next ITI board meeting.
Well, I think you guys seem to be a bit more organised than the experiences I've had before. It's been a case of like the producers or whoever ringing up and giving you a list of questions that you prepare, and then you go live on air and they ask you something completely different. which
Yes,
is
that's
kind of
very
scary.
true.
Yeah.
We only do that at the end of the show.
Once
That
you
must
feel
be such a relief. Yeah.
I'm actually really worried that we're discovering people who are less organized than us.
Come on.
Because
I want to
everyone who
well.
comes on the show, we make them sign a blood agreement that they will not tell anyone what the background to the show is actually like.
It's worked out so far, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah, but before we jump into the topic, maybe we should discuss a little bit why we are interested in this topic, because I think we have touched on associations before in earlier episodes, but for some reason we figured, well, this should be a topic on its own. And I think I'm not telling too much when I say that we probably will have 2 episodes on the topic of associations, so stay tuned for that. But Jonathan, Alex, what was the motivation behind doing this?
Part of my motivation for wanting to do this was that I'm noticing a shift in the association's landscape. I think I wrote in my first book that traditionally associations have been very top-down, they've been very guarded, they've been very kind of guild model of we set the standard of how you come into this profession, and if you don't do it our way, we don't accept you. And now I'm more and more seeing associations still have high standards, but do a lot more about outreach, about PR, about increasing the standards in the profession rather than saying these are the standards and we're not going to move them. And so I thought especially Corrine and Sarah were people who, in my eyes, are leading the lights and changing the way that we see associations, changing the way associations see ourselves. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to have them together on the podcast to give their own view of how the landscape is changing and what an association means now.
How about we pass that question on to Corrine and Sarah straight away? What do you think is maybe the most important thing for you? Maybe what was something that you wanted to do when you started out in your respective associations?
Do we have an order to speak in, or shall I just dive in?
Just dive in.
Whoever jumps in first gets to speak first.
Go for it.
My first involvement with ITI was basically I was a freelance translator. I needed more training. I thought the ITI should be giving it to me, and it wasn't coming. So I basically I'm a busybody by nature, and so I got myself onto the education and training committee, and then sort of from there things developed. We ended up getting ourselves a person to actually work on professional development, and we started doing a lot more planning of suitable content for our people, and also spotting where the association itself could not provide the content, giving advice to people on where to find the content they needed, because basically the association can only do so much because everything has to break even. You can't be making a loss repeatedly. So we can only run training that will cover its own cost, really. And so for some people who want to learn, specialist language about nuclear physics, we can't run a course on that. But what we can do is advise them on where to look for suitable content. So we spent a lot of time building up our understanding of the area of CPD and what it could offer. And really that's what got me sucked into ITI. And here I am sort of 12 years later, sitting in the seat of the chair. So it's been quite a ride.
And I haven't checked the exact dates, but you seem to have been in your current function for not too long. What was your main motivation, Corrine, or your main? Was there something you were really desperate to do when you were chairing the association?
Well, I guess probably a better way to come at it, and I think when I was making some notes on your guys' questions, what I think is maybe more relevant for interpreters was when I started freelancing, which is now like 16 years ago. I had a baby and a master's degree in French and an idea that I wanted to do a job where I could work from home when my daughter was little, at least. And so one of the first things I did, so ATA, one of the things you always have to talk about when you talk about things American is how huge they are. So ATA is so large that we have state chapters. So one of the first things I did as a freelancer was join my state association, the Colorado Translators Association. So I live in Colorado, which is in the Rocky Mountains of the US. And long story short, at the end of my first year of freelancing, which I started from absolute zero, about 50% of my work had come from referrals through people I met through the Colorado Translators Association. So I think for me, yeah, the first sort of, proof of concept that I saw for associations, and I had never really belonged to a professional association before, was, this is how you get to know people who start to form a really valuable and important network for you. So that was, that's probably a more illustrative example, because I think as well, in an association the size of ATA, we have about 10,500 members. What I wanted to do as president is probably a lot less relevant than what Sarah wanted to do as chair of the ITI, because the whole association is a much bigger ship. But I think my, first impression that in my first year of freelancing, it was literally like half my work came from networking in the Colorado Translators Association. That's kind of where I started with it.
I think that's a good point to mention as well, because that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about the associations again from the perspective of the associations. Because when we did the other episode about professional associations, it was very much kind of coming from the interpreter's point of view, and I can see more and more now that not only interpreters but also translators, for example, in the BDU in Germany. There's a discussion going on as to what associations actually do. Like, what role do they play? Should they be a job platform for their members? Like, is that their main kind of mission? Are they supposed to get them jobs? Like, Corrine, you were just saying you were getting 50% of your jobs in the first year from the ATA, which is great. But that's kind of a discussion that we're currently having in Germany. Is that the main kind of driving force behind the associations, or should it be what Jonathan was mentioning earlier as well, and Sarah as well, the training aspects, the kind of specialist workshops on a particular field, or maybe improving your language skills, and just making sure that those qualifications and levels are high in whatever you do.
Well, and in the US too, I feel like something that is a larger and larger component of ATA is we get more and more requests from our members for advocacy and lobbying efforts at the state and even national levels. So, for example, to lobby the US government to buy language services based on the best value rather than the lowest price. So I feel like associations, fill all roles, from the micro, like helping me meet people who will refer work to me, to the macro, which is like helping the US government understand the importance of the work that I do.
Well, I was just going to say that I think you can tell from both Corrine's story and mine that we joined basically out of self-interest to some extent, and that is true. That is often the case. Most people who join a professional association, they do it because they think it's going to do them good and their business good, and that may be through the networking. It may be because you're publicly listed once you've got a qualification or you've passed an entry assessment or something. And to be quite honest, I think that's a fair thing to do. It's only once you are in an association normally that you get the bigger view of it's not just about the individual. When you look at proper professional associations across the board, real professions have professional associations, and those professional associations are there to represent and to sort of stake out an area and say, we are professionals, we do it like this, these are our standards. If you want to work properly with us, this is how you do it. And you're there to give knowledge and to inform about the profession as well as to benefit the members. I mean, if you look at law, accountancy, medicine, architecture, they all have professional associations who are, quite strong. Even ATA, the size it is quite small by comparison to other professional associations in the US. We are small.
Medical, legal, the Bar Association, the American Medical Association. We're tiny compared to that.
We are limited in what we can do and what we can aim to do, but we can still have a very strong voice. And the more people who work together with their association, the better your sort of lobbying, you can increase the visibility of your members, you can get professional recognition for them. And that's really, at the higher level, what professional associations should be about.
I think that comes back to a question that I heard certainly when I was first joining the profession, was this idea that somehow professional associations should be setting rates of pay or, minimum fees or whatever. And I know certainly ITI has worked quite hard with its members to say, we are not a union, we do other things, but we're not a union. Do you think when people join professional associations, they almost treat it like they've become an employee rather than, these are lots of professionals getting together to work together for something?
I think it's hard to understand exactly what professional association is. And I must have to admit, I didn't really have a full picture until I was on the board, because it's only when you're on the board that or the council, I don't know what you call it in the ATI, that's the only time that you actually see the full picture of everything the association is doing. And it's your expectations of what you as an individual will get from that association, they change in proportion, I think. And, you become aware of the vast amount of work there still is to do in so many directions once you're sort of involved in the sort of running of the organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Even in Germany, where I'm currently on the board of the VKD, the German Association of Conference Interpreters, it's very difficult to communicate to all members equally what the association is doing at any given time. And sometimes members will complain that we're not doing this or that this isn't being done. And then you kind of have to go like, well, we're doing it, but it's not at a point where you might want it to see or where we can communicate it efficiently to the public. So it's kind of difficult to the I don't know, I don't mean this in any particular way, but to like the regular member to get a real picture of what the association is doing. Sarah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, we've actually provided them literally with a picture of what we're doing. We have our strategic plan is drawn. When we first drew up our strategic plan, we drew a tree with branches, and each branch was something we were doing. And as they were done, they were ticked off. And so the next issue of the tree showed what had been done. And the one tree has now grown to 3 trees. And on our one-day in event on June the 6th, we'll be presenting a little wood of all the things that we're doing. And so it does aid understanding if you can do it in a sort of graphic form like that. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I face when I'm on the board is people ask you a question, and I sometimes have to say to people, would you like me to answer as an individual interpreter or as an ITI board member? Because the answer that I will give at those 2 levels are entirely different.
Yeah, and it has to be like that.
And there are some things that you do in an association that people ask you about and you say, well, can I just say that leave it with us at the moment? And leave it with us usually means we're doing something which we're not allowed to tell you about right now.
Very true.
And it's this understanding of it's like the iceberg, the bit you see above the water is a tiny percentage of everything that's going on. I mean, this is one of the other questions that I was thinking that we should move to now is, what would you say are the challenges that are facing you as an association now that you're trying to deal with?
The challenges as an association, the main one for ITI is really member involvement, because we have a small office staff who run the office and who sort of keep data where it should be, that sort of thing. But all of the actual strategic goals, strategic aims, strategic developments are done by volunteer members. And the more volunteer members we have committing even a small amount of time, the more we can move things forward. So that is a massive challenge, because of course the people you want to be there helping you, representing you, etc., are the people who are successful and busy professionals who it's hard to get them to commit time. So we're trying to look at ways of having small commitments people can do of, say, 6 hours a year, which they can then register as their CPD contribution to the profession in the year. They win, we win, everybody wins. So it's, trying to do that is our big challenge at the moment, I think.
Yep. And what would you say is your biggest challenge in ATA, Corrine?
Well, I'd say, when I thought about this, I think, again, in the sort of macro and micro levels, I would say for us, on the big picture level, it's staying relevant in the social media age. So if you think about like from the Middle Ages until 1995, about the only way to connect with other people who did the same job you did was through some sort of guild or professional association. And now I think part of what we look at is, what do we offer that a free Facebook group doesn't offer that we deserve your $190 a year? And I think the answer would be, we are a larger and more credible voice that when you go talk to your congressperson and say, I'm a member of the American Translators Association, and I'd like to encourage you to, maintain the U.S. executive order that requires, language access in the courts for people who don't speak English. That's a lot different from saying, I'm with a translator Facebook group and I'd like to encourage that, So I think there's that element, the whole, relevancy issue. And then, how do we help our members prepare for the future of our professions in a way that is both realistic and not paranoid? I mean, that's a whole other topic that I think, for those of us, like I'm 46, so I'd say I'll probably work in this profession another 25 years, perhaps longer. And, what will our jobs look like in 25 years? I certainly don't have the answer to that. But, and I think that techniques like, technologies like video remote interpreting are placing some of the same pressures on interpreters that translators have felt from translation memory and machine translation. But I think, what we believe is we are certainly stronger facing those challenges together than being picked off one by one, as whatever the future. And I think the point is, I don't have the answer to the future of the profession, but we are much stronger as a group.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something that, I know the International Federation of Translation is looking into sort of the future at the conference in Brisbane last summer. The whole idea of disruption and diversification was kind of at the fore. And as a result, really, within ITI, we've founded our research network where we're launching that on the 16th of June as well, where we're trying to pull together people who actually know about how these tools are developing. And basically what we want to do at ITI is to draw together arguments in favor of the human translator and in favor of sort of human augmented translation rather than machine translation. And the idea is to work out exactly what it is the humans can do that the machines just cannot do. And then that is where our future lies, basically. So it's going to be quite a big job to identify that, because we're going to go through a period of massively rapid change over the next sort of 20 years or so. But I think if we arm ourselves with the correct arguments, then we can gird our loins for battle, and we can go in there and fight for our corner and say, hang on a minute, we understand context, we understand culture, we understand all the things that machines just, nope, they do words. At most, they do sentences or segments of sentences. So there's a lot we do that they don't do, but we've got to pin it down and get the arguments right to fight back against the hype that has been. It's very easy to sell people an idea that they want to hear. So when you're hyping machine translation, you get free, instant, perfect translation, just like this. Bazimba, there it is. Who's not going to want that argument? When we come up and we say, well, actually, in translator talk, because we're really good at this, we've got loads of meta language to talk about what we do. And we can come up and we can explain to you in fine detail all the mechanics of the language that the machines can't do. But you can't understand that because you think, it's too complex. So for a whole sector of professional communicators, we are appallingly bad at telling people what we actually do. And we need to work out those messages and get out there and say in simple terms that the client can understand, with machine translation, you get this, with us, you get that. And these are the differences. And it has to be on a fair argument, not just saying you need a Rolls Royce every time, because you don't. Sometimes you only need a Mini, but you've got to be fair in what you're presenting.
I think this is one of the things that I've noticed about translation associations and interpreting associations over the past few years, is that there's been a kind of gathering of the amoebas into some kind of bigger organism. And when you get on Facebook groups, everyone's got their own little opinion, and you don't need a common, things translators never say, or marketing for translators and interpreting for translators and interpreters. Those groups don't need a common voice. In fact, they thrive on having a multitude of voices. When you get to association level and you're lobbying Congress, or you're talking to the Times, or telling the Daily Express why they're talking nonsense again, you need a voice that makes sense, and you need a common voice. And I think seeing associations now as people coming together and speaking as one, I think actually makes a big difference, and changes, again, the way that we see associations, that it's not the association telling the members, it's the members in the association working together and telling the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
And that actually goes on to a question that we were going to ask a minute ago, which is, apart from technology, do you see any other market level difficulties and changes, and what are your associations doing to try to meet them?
I think GDPR is going to be quite an issue, simply because of the crossing borders with information. There is quite a lot of global movement. A lot of translators love their freedom. They like to move, and there are going to be implications of GDPR on whether or not you can do work from a beach in Thailand. There's going to be issues. At the moment, it's not at all clear, and we're trying to get to grips with this in ITI. First of all, we're trying to make sure that ITI itself is GDPR compliant, because quite frankly, you are more likely as a bigger entity to be challenged than you are as an individual freelancer. But trying to get to grips with, for the variety of our members, in the variety of their national and personal circumstances of how they work, where they work, and who they work with, it's really hard to give sound advice that is correct to all of them. So we're working on that at the moment, but it's going to be a complicated one. And I would advise anybody who is working across borders to sort of make sure they find out from both their source client areas and wherever they are working from, what the rules are and whether or not they're compatible, and where there may be problems. You really need to take in all the sources you can to make sure that you're on top of it, really. Having said that, it's pretty unlikely that you are going to be pursued for issues relating to GDPR as a sole operator, I think, quite frankly, from what I've been hearing. So, yeah, it's going to be a big one.
Thank you for making me feel better. I can go and leak all my clients' information to the world and no one cares.
Yeah, let's not get into GDPR at this point, because then it's going to be a very long podcast. I wanted to move on to, because we were speaking about challenges, I wanted to move on to another challenge, or to a potential challenge, because you are both in charge of an association that is a professional association for translators and interpreters. And some would say that those two groups are in fact quite different in many regards. So I'm wondering how you tackle that, how that informs your work as well, I guess. And maybe we start with Corrine.
Sure. So one story I always tell when people who don't know that much about the language professions ask, what would be the difference between translators and interpreters? Was 1 year in Colorado. So in Colorado, we have a translators association and an interpreters association. And 1 year we decided to have a joint holiday party. And the party consisted of interpreters dancing to very loud Latin music, while translators sat in the back of the room and drank wine and watched the interpreters dance to the loud Latin music. So, when people say, we really are kind of separated by a common profession, I think there's some truth to that. But I will say in ATA, in the last maybe 10 years, there has been a huge sea change in how we see interpreters within the association, which has gone from basically if interpreters want to join us, great. And if not, that's okay too. Two, interpreters are one of the fastest growing constituencies within ATA. So again, like, I apologize that it's impossible to talk about anything American without talking about its enormity. And just as an example, ATA has 20 divisions right now. So those are for languages and specializations and things like that. And we have 4,000 members in our interpreters division. It's the second biggest division after Spanish in ATA. And to our knowledge, if it were its own association, it would be the largest association for interpreters in the world.
So I think bigger than ITI, I think.
Yeah. So I think, in the past 10 years, we've gone from seeing interpreters as, great, they're totally welcome to join us, to interpreters really being a, very core constituency within ATA. And for example, now, if you have an interpreting credential, you can have that displayed in the ATA directory, just like my certified translator credential would be displayed and things like that. And I think, and I know you guys wanted to talk a little about corporate members too. And I think it kind of goes to like, we see ourselves as an umbrella organization for everyone with a stake in the language professions. And certainly within ATA, our interpreter constituency is large and growing. And I think that's to the great benefit of ATA. And I'm not saying that only because I'm talking on an interpreter podcast. I mean, one thing I've really learned from interpreters is like, translators are not resistors. If a translator works for a bad client, they will most likely write them a negative review online and never work for them again and leave it at that. Whereas interpreters, interpreters form organizations, and interpreters, really pressure the clients and entities who employ them to, abide by their ideal working conditions and treat them as professionals, and things that I think actually we as translators have a lot to learn from interpreters about that side of the profession. So I think it's, to ATA's great benefit that we have interpreters within the association.
Yeah, I think there's something similar to that in ITI, because ITI was founded as the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, not translators and interpreters. So it was deliberately it was deliberately planned that it would be an entity for the sector. And again, we also have corporate members. We have corporate education members as well. And we have other forms of membership for sort of people who are somehow linked with the profession, but not a translator or an interpreter. And the whole idea was that basically together we're stronger, that we can help defend, develop, protect, inform people about our sector better by working together. We do get some friction between our individual members and some of our corporate members sometimes. But the view of ITI institutionally is that we are all language service providers, and if we all campaign to improve the perspectives of our sector, then it's better for everybody. If you wanted to be in a union, you would join another entity. For interpreters, at the moment in the UK in particular, the public service interpreters have had a very, very tough time. And quite frankly, I don't think we have a swelling membership of people in that category. Most of the people who work as interpreters tend to do business liaison, or they have a portfolio career with a variety of services they offer, because times are extremely hard, extraordinarily hard in the UK at the moment. And with the wonderful Brexit approaching, it's a time of both threat and opportunity for interpreters, because I really do believe that when this comes to fruition, should it be completed, there will be a surge in demand for the services of interpreters when we have to do a lot more to get our own business deals, should we not be in the EU trade bloc. So yeah, it's a toughie. Yeah.
I mean, that's a good word for it. Yeah, I wasn't going to bring it up myself, but now you've mentioned it. Brexit is something that you're working on as an association, I believe, and that you're making preparations for. Is that
yes? Well, because ITI is apolitical, we have members who are pro-Brexit, we have members who are not pro-Brexit, and we have no political statement on that. What we have to help our members do is deal with the fallout of whatever happens. And in order to do that, we've set up a working party on Brexit, which has members, international members and UK members, who are monitoring developments, especially in terms of anything that could affect the way that our members work, so that we can be as informed and ready to respond as possible should things change. I mean, there may well be tariffs imposed on services across borders. Who knows? You know, it's all up in the air at the moment. So we're trying to keep an eye on it, monitor it, and be as aware as we can be, so that we can help our members climb over the wall once it's built, should it be built. Yeah.
And deal with the toughie, as you called it.
Yes.
I think this is one of the difficulties, though, and one of the reasons why I'm very glad that I'm in ITI is that the reality is that should Brexit happen, and now there are various reasons why there are doubts as to whether Brexit will happen, or whether we'll end up in the European Economic Area, or whether we'll do a Switzerland. No one actually has a clue what's going on. But should Brexit happen the way that certain parts of UK society want it, that means that our current cohort of conference interpreters are going to be stuck with about 2 to 3 years of solid policy work. Just because there's going to be so many European Works Councils to try and sort out what happens in each company. You know, before we even do the trade, all the companies have to work out how we're going to treat our employees. And so I think the interest, I agree with Sarah that it's an opportunity, but it's also a slight challenge, because, you know, would you, being a national of another EU country, want to stay in the UK post-Brexit? Well, if you're an interpreter and you can realistically take your career anywhere in the EU, there are big questions about whether you would even want to stay. And it's a difficult one to deal with, and that's the kind of question I think that you leave for the associations to, you work with the associations to deal with, because as an individual interpreter, it's far bigger than you could possibly deal with. But in the middle of all of these negotiations, you can have associations lobbying and writing letters, or getting letter writing campaigns, or collating information on a scale that you just couldn't do as an individual. It's kind of like GDPR. You have economies of scale when you work together.
Yeah, we provided guidance and a sort of framework letter to members so that they could lobby their MP, should they wish to. But obviously, because we don't have a political stance, we would not make a political move one way or the other. What we will do once we have any idea of what the implications may be for our sector, then yes, we will obviously defend our sector. But that has to be for the good of the sector as a whole. And we've had advice at the university about how to get government to listen to you. And at the moment, you can imagine in government, it's a maelstrom of, you can just imagine. And the only way you get heard by government is by going in as a cross-party, sort of cross-sector group that comes in with a solution. So we've been working in ITI at forming links with other entities, other linked areas of trade and industry, of the business associations, etc., so that we can go in with arguments which are agreed amongst the members, saying, for language services, for trade, for industry, for business, you need to do this. This is our recommendation. So it's having those messages ready. No one's listening at the moment. There's no point saying anything right now, because there are bigger issues that I think probably for the next 12 to 18 months, possibly longer, they'll be hogging all the space available to the people in power. But once there is, the new framework for trade has to be carried forward, we need to be there saying, you need these services, these are the sorts of services you need, these are the sort of providers you should be working with. So, yes. So an opportunity, but a lot of work.
Whole lot of work.
Isn't that what we love? But Sarah, actually, let me just kind of latch on to something that you said, but kind of switch gears a little bit. You've mentioned that you're connecting with, that you're kind of linking up with different organizations or actors involved in the different well, spheres of trade, if you will. And I was just wondering, and this is also, of course, for you, Corrine, if you guys from the ITI and from the ATA, if you're looking at kind of cooperating or collaborating in a way between different associations, both nationally or internationally. And it doesn't only have to be interpreting or translation associations. It could be, I don't know, a medical association. Corrine, you've mentioned those earlier. So maybe, do you guys do any cross trainings? Do you do any awareness trainings? Or is there any sort of collaboration going on between those?
We're all members of, well, I know ATA and ITI are all members of, FIT, the International Federation of Translation Associations. And that's a worldwide entity that campaigns on things that are sort of very central, really, to translation and interpreting. I mean, they managed to get the UN recognition of International Translation Day on the 30th of September. It's now an official day. Things like that. They work on those sorts of things. But when you're talking about the more practical sort of, what would you call it, sort of ground level, working with the people who are likely to employ your members, you can't really do that as a world approach because markets are so different. You have to be a bit more local about that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do. In ATA, I guess we do quite a bit of that type of thing in the sense that we send people, normally ATA board members, but sometimes other people as well, to other associations' conferences. So, for example, this past week was the annual convention of the American Copy Editors Society, and we sent Madalena Sanchez-Zampaulo, who's our PR chair, who went to that conference and did a presentation on preparing your copy for translation. So I think that's one thing that we found to be really effective is to just go there. I mean, it's easy for me to say because I actually do the least of it of anyone on the board. But that's one thing that we found really effective is that when at least, I mean, this is something that you guys probably have less of a need to do in Europe. But in the U.S., there's a large contingent of the U.S. population that knows little to nothing about languages other than English and how they fit into the business world. And so we found it really effective to just go to those other associations' conferences. We send somebody to the Association of Business Communicators conference every year and things like that, and try to have them do a presentation about translation. Or a colleague and I went to the Rocky Mountain Paralegals Association. They're like legal assistants, so people who assist lawyers. And we went and did a presentation about how to work successfully with translators and interpreters. So yeah, I mean, we do that largely by going in person to those associations.
Yeah, I think if you look at the way people move, the sort of conference speakers move, you'll find a lot of them are members of 2 or 3 associations, and that they will contribute content to many. I mean, we have an agreement with the Mediterranean editors and translators to share sort of speakers and reviews of content with them, and also with the Sense, what are they called? The editors in the Netherlands. And we sort of share speakers, we share content, we share ideas deliberately, but that's to benefit our members. When you're talking about influencing other groups, we're perhaps not as well advanced in that as it sounds like you are at the ATA, but we are developing materials to go to business events to talk about how to work with a translator, how to work with an interpreter, what it is that languages can offer your business. And we're working with, the Department of Trade and Industry. We've just formed a contact there, and he's given feedback on our sort of draft presentation on what languages can do for you, and we're going to work on that and then hopefully deliver it at a few events. So we're getting there, but we're definitely not as firmly on that path as the ATA sounds to be.
I think this comes back to the issue of volunteers, though. I now go to business events that aren't for interpreters because I want to get clients at them. And personally, I find them very useful in that there's always a scream at professional associations for more in-depth, translator-specific training. People don't want training on how to be a translator anymore. They don't even want medical translation training anymore. They want in-depth training on, I don't know, translation in gynecology or something. And I found out very quickly that the best training on my target market is being given to the people in my target market.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
And so rather than shouting at ITI saying, why is there not more training on this? Why is there not more training on that? I thought, well, I know where that training is taking place. That's taking place at trade shows. That's taking place at business shows. I'm going to go there. Mm. And while I'm doing the training with those people, I'm going to meet them, and you never know, one or two might become clients.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, and should you wish to have, professional information from other professions, then the best thing to do is to go to events for the other professions. Now, I know a lot of medical translators who go to the European Medical Writers Association meetings, and they are now trained as medical writers as well as translators because that's the way to do it. They are super professional. It's
There's an expectation almost that a professional association would be like an all-you-can-eat restaurant.
Yeah.
You can show up with your plate and fill it up. And I think it's wonderful for associations to work together, especially outside of the normal specializations. But by the same token, if someone's an engineering translator, the only person in the entire association who's going to form a bond with your local institute of engineers is going to be an engineering translator who, maybe used to be an engineer and still kept his or her membership.
We have some of those, yes.
Yeah, we have some of those, and I would like to kind of form a call. It's more translators tend to be better at doing that than interpreters, but certainly interpreters, I know one interpreter who specialises in neurology interpreting, and he interprets as much as he can at neurology conferences. Well, he should be a member then of whatever neurology association is relevant and should be the link between his interpreting association and the Association of Neurology. Everyone waits for an MOU when actually they're just waiting for you.
But there is also an issue that people in the professions that are what we say better funded, a lot of people who are medics will go to medical conferences that are funded by drug companies, pharma companies, and so the entrance fee will be so exorbitant that a freelancer of any nature would not be able to afford it. So we have to also be quite intelligent about how we get around that one. And I mean, I've suggested to my students in the past, why not write directly to the organizers and say, I am a student of translation. I am hoping to enter into the area of medical translation. I would really love to attend your event, but it's beyond my price bracket, blah, blah, blah. And quite often you'll find that they are quite generous in offering spaces. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I am a freelance translator working in this area. I would really appreciate blah, blah, blah. It can be done, but you've got to have a lot of front.
Yeah, interpreters don't usually lack front. But I joke with people that if you want to know what interpreters are going to be talking about in 10 years' time, you look at what translators are talking about now. And it's a kind of, this episode for me, as much as anything else, is appealing to interpreters to listen to what the translators side of the translation associations have done and go, well, we might not be able to be as specialized. I came across a translator recently who only translated text on concrete. Must have been a very hard specialism to get into. There's my fun of the day.
Code. I know someone who does only coatings. Yeah. Chemical coatings. Yeah.
No interpreter could ever do that. But on the other hand, you could be a conference interpreter who specialises in European Works Councils. You would be insane if you were an interpreter who only did European Works Councils, and you would need to go and see a doctor very quickly. But you could do that. And you could be the world's expert on European Works Councils, and you would have my pity and my honour. But we can do these things, and perhaps that's a route to the profession being seen better. We were talking about earlier about, and I think we've just picked up on that there, about the need for individuals to do work themselves. Could you two kind of tell us a little bit about how you encourage people to volunteer and the power of volunteering within your organizations.
Well, maybe before you two answer that question, maybe we can just switch it here. And I could ask the other Alex, for example, why he decided to become a volunteer. Because I think he's been one quite a while.
I think it was Sarah who was saying that, or was it you, Corrine, who said you're a busybody?
That's
one of
that's
you said
me.
it earlier.
That's me, definitely.
That's you, Sarah. Yeah, and I'm kind of the same way, you know, and especially in the beginning of my career as a freelancer starting out, it's not like you're drowning in work. So, you know, I figured in the beginning, particularly, why not kind of get involved in the associations now that I still have the time? And then I just kind of tasted blood and I stuck with it. And yeah, and it's just kind of nice. And I can only recommend, I do recommend it to young up and coming interpreters and translators to get involved, not necessarily immediately go onto the various boards of this world, but, you know, get involved to help, I don't know, organize a regional meeting or something along those lines. And then kind of through that step by step, kind of get a foothold in the association, kind of make your mark, get to know the people, and then you can see if it's for you, if it's not for you, and then maybe you'll end up on the board. Not saying that needs to be the end goal, but, you know, baby steps.
I'm going to quickly tell my story now. I'm not so much a busybody as an opinionated piece of work. And years
but a charming one.
You would never know I was an opinionated piece of work, would you? And about 8-9 years ago now, there was an ITI forum on LinkedIn, and then I believe he was vice chair or board member, Nick Rosenthal threw out a question saying, if ITI could do anything for you, what should it do? And me being opinionated and a fairly new interpreter who thought he knew everything, just came up with some stuff. And especially as a new interpreter, you think you know everything that needs fixed. And then, you know, after a little bit longer in that discussion, Nick sent me, I think it was a DM on Twitter saying, with, you know, something like, with boldness like yours, have you ever considered joining the board?
Good question.
And I went, no. He said, you really should. So I joined the board. I left about a year and a half later because we had a baby and I had a PhD. And then I came back because actually, even when I was first on the board, it was a very difficult time. Even then, I could see that when you have a chair like Nick, when you have a chair like you, and when you have a chair like Sarah, chairs who can drive things and bring people with them and create and change things, then actually being a board member becomes a lot of fun. And you learn so much about the macro level of your profession that you would have never seen anywhere else.
Yeah,
that's very true.
I think my story is quite similar to yours, Alex. It's kind of being a busybody and having too much time on their hands, especially early in the career. So yeah, I think that's what got me into it as well.
But it's just such a wonderful way to build your own little community of practice as well. I mean, I met, you know, some of my best colleagues, and my best jobs have come through things that have just by chance happened to be mentioned in meetings, in, you know, organizing things, in all sorts of odd situations, but all to do with ITI. You know, my best clients have come through chance encounters at ITI meetings of various sorts. And it just grows your world, it grows your contacts, and it improves the quality of the people you meet, because people who are interested in professional entities are the people who, no, they tend to be the people who are more driven, who are seeking to improve themselves and their lot in life in some way. So it is a really good way to move forward, rather than just the constant round and round rhetoric that you will find on, you know, on various sort of free, open forums. You know, when people have committed to an association, they are determined to improve things. You know, they're not just there to groan or grumble, or even, you know, be quite happy but report, you know, wonderful things. They're there to actually do something in a structured manner. So it's a good place to be if you want to, you know, advance yourself and advance the sector.
Yeah, that's very true. But I actually want to mention a challenge, and on that note, I would like to give you a second little glimpse of my story as to how I ended up in all these different associations. It's because I was always the only one at the right place at the right time, if you will, kind of saying, yeah, sure, I'm going to do it. And That's the way that I ended up at the NWTN. That's the way that I ended up at the ITI. I was always the only person kind of running for the position or job. I was the only person saying, yeah, sure, I can do the job. And then if you're the only person who says that you can do the job, you get the job. Yeah, you usually end up getting the job. And it's been that way in all of my associations. That's kind of how I ended up in all these different positions. And I think that goes to a larger theme in associations that we see even in Germany over here, is that I wouldn't say we're struggling to find volunteers, but and this is kind of a question to the both of you, Sarah and Corrine. How do you activate the membership to volunteer? Because I find it quite gratifying most of the times. And as you said, Sarah, it becomes quite fun, and you get to learn a lot about not only your profession, but also your kind of fellow professionals and kind of like the industry at large. But it can be a lot of work. And sometimes I think that people kind of want to just lean back and reap the fruits of I don't know, someone else's labors in the association. So yeah, exactly. So how do you activate the membership to become volunteers is kind of the question.
My approach is that if I see someone who shows a spark in any direction, I ask them to do one small task. And if they do the one small task, I then ask them to do one a little bit bigger. And, you can tell if people are willing to become involved. And anyone who approaches me and says they're interested, I make sure I get back to them and find something that they can do. And we for instance, let me think, in the Spanish network, when I was sort of recently joined, a lot of people were wanting mentoring. And so I've been a teacher. I know how to draw a list and a group and this sort of thing. So I said, okay, who would offer mentoring? And a few people in the group said, I would. And so we just put that out and said, these people are offering mentoring. These are the sort of subjects. If you'd like to be mentored, get back to us. And because we designed it specifically to be this 6 hours over a year, nobody was scared off by it. And so if you can get people to commit a small but regular amount of time, you're onto a winner, because very few people will object if you ask them to do something small. The trouble is that a lot of associations will ask you to do something small, and then suddenly, like Alex was saying, you are responsible for a massive amount of content. So we have to guard against that. And what we're doing at ITI is we're developing various sort of labels that people can have. So you can be an ambassador on one topic. This is all in the sort of pre-publication stages, but the idea is to have ambassadors who have a topic that we want them to go out there and speak about publicly. We can have people who do outreach, which can be simply going into a local school regularly, or several local schools once in a year at sort of key points in the school cycle. For instance, every school in the UK has a book week. You can go in and read a book in another language. Every school in the country has a secondary school will have a careers time when children are choosing the options that they're going to study for their secondary school exams. And so it's identifying those key points and getting our members to go and do one. We've got 3,000 members. If each one does one of those, how many people have you informed about our profession? And it's the drip, drip, drip. It's designing things that people can do. They can just take it off the shelf, go and deliver it. It takes them an hour or two at most, and they've done something wonderful. And it's making sure that we have plenty of those that people can use, depending on their circumstances and their confidence. So,
what's your take on this, Corrine? What about trying to activate the membership, as Alex put it?
Yeah, so I think, one thing that has become apparent to me in ATA is a key characteristic in an association leader is a keen eye for a young, energetic volunteer. And to make sure that you get your claws in them before someone else does. I think that's a critical skill for being on the board of any association. But yeah, I think that all of us know you have to have a leadership pipeline, because from day one, you need to be thinking about who comes after you. Because, your goal is to make yourself obsolete. Because when I'm going to the ATA conference in 25 years, I want to be attending a fabulous conference that someone else puts on. I don't want that to be dependent on me for all eternity. So the pipeline is hugely important. So I think, we ourselves, everybody on the board and the ATA officers are always on the lookout for the Alexes out there, the young, energetic, smart people with good ideas who just need to be plugged into a role that needs to be filled. And then, for example, on all of our committees, we encourage our committee chairs to have a deputy chair so that we know, who is potentially coming after that person, so we don't have a huge void. Because I think, one thing we all experience in associations is that people who have big ideas and big personalities run really great programs, but they are also very hard to replace. And that it doesn't serve anybody well if you have a single point of failure, that you have this incredible program, but it's dependent on a big idea, big personality person who is essentially irreplaceable. So that's something that I think is really different in associations than in, say, the corporate world. And I think the two ways we think about it are the pipeline and then just approaching people individually. Because, when I think of myself when I was in my 20s, it sounds like a nice idea to say, if you'd like to get involved more in ATA, give a board member a call. When I was in my 20s, I would have been like, can the earth please swallow me up before I have to call a board member and say, you don't know me, but I have what might be a ridiculous idea that I think ATA should implement. But the thing is that I think, to your story, Alex, that a lot of times we see in the perspectives of our newer, younger members things we should be doing that those of us who have been in the association or the profession for a long time don't realize, don't know about, don't think about. So I think also approaching those people personally and saying, you would be really good at this. You're smart, you have good ideas, you're good with people, you have a lot of energy. What about filling this role within our association? And I think that it's important to realize that you can't always rely on, well, we've sent out 73 emails and we still don't have anybody to organize this, that sometimes you have to go to the person who would be great at it and say, you would be great at this. And then they'll step up, but you can't always rely on members to take the initiative, because when you think of yourself as a first-year member, like it takes a level of confidence I wouldn't have had in order to do that.
That's a good point.
I just wanted to say I really appreciated that you mentioned this difficult line, I think, between, spotting those people and approaching them, and then also making sure, on the other hand, that these people do not really become irreplaceable. Because I've seen more than one association where there were problems then with people that have become or even made themselves irreplaceable, because that can really cause a big headache, especially in the long run when this goes on for a long time. But maybe that's just a segue. We don't need to get into this.
Actually,
unless anybody wants.
Well, I was going to say it's a really interesting point, because one of the things that's helpful about the ITI board is when you join, you're joining for a 3-year term, which you can renew once maximum. You're not going to become the ruler of the free world. You're not going to be, ITI is not going to be your baby. You have a term. And while I think most associations have that at board level, I think there's always a little bit of squeamishness about introducing that further down, because, we think, well, they're doing such a good job with our Committee for Esoteric Regulations, and no one else really wants that, so we'll just let them stay there. But the problem is that when you have, I know of cases where people have sat as the chair of a committee for so long that it became impossible at board level for anyone to think that anyone else could run that committee.
Yeah.
And then you think, well, okay, well, what do we do now? On the one hand, you want to encourage young interpreters, join in, volunteer, grab an ITI badge and go to a trade show or whatever. On the other hand, it's quite strategically difficult for an association to start the conversation with a leadership candidate in some role saying, we'd like you to do this, but by the way, there's an end point that by then you will no longer be doing this. For some people, that's helpful. For some people, it's like, well, why do you want me at all if you're limiting me to 3 years or 6 years or whatever? And it's this line between you want the best people in the job, but you don't want people to have an empire. And actually, I would maybe it's because I like ridiculous ideas. I sometimes wonder whether the people with the most ridiculous ideas are actually the people that you want in the room, because we've all met the person who's had one idea and that idea is 20 years old and it was out of date when they first had it. You maybe need some ridiculous people hanging around. I mean, I remember our ITI board strategy away days. You have to be ready to throw some silly ideas, even if it's just in a small group of 4 or 5 members.
Yep.
Because what sounds like a stupid idea to you, there's usually someone sensible at the table who goes, well, hold on, we might not be able to go that far, but you've actually got me thinking about something. And my experience so far has been that largely the nuttiest people in the room are usually the interpreters. I don't know why. They usually open their mouth and just let stuff fall out. And then you get a translator who's used to thinking in detail, going, that sounds crazy, but there's a kernel of something good in there. They deal with half-expressed nonsense for a living. They can deal with people coming up with a crazy idea. Well,
I mean, I think another key thing you learn as an association leader is there's a shred of truth in every unhinged rant. That's one. That's a lesson. I mean, and I mean that in a sort of joking but not joking way. That I think sometimes, in those fringe arguments, there is something that you go, why don't we do that, or why do we do that? And I think that having that diversity of viewpoints is really, really valuable.
Exactly. I mean, our board strategy meetings that we had deliberately because there hadn't been a long-term strategy previously. And frankly, I was incredulous because every entity I've ever worked with, because I haven't always been a single freelancer, they've always had a 1-year, 2-year, 5-year plan and a wish list for 10 years' time. And if you don't have that, you lose direction. And, when the next person takes over leading the entity, they go off on their little, navigation towards whatever it is that fascinates them, and all of that, what would you call it, collateral that has been built up gets lost. So we've kind of quite deliberately drawn up a strategy that is broad and solid with, I think we started off with 23 priorities that we then had to put in order of which were the ones that you could do easily and with very little money. Right, we'll do those. Mm-hmm. Which are the ones that will take a bit more work? Right, we'll start those. And which are the ones that are just pie in the sky and they're not going to happen? Well, we'll keep them there and we'll aim for them when we can. And you have to do that because obviously I've got 1 more year as chair of the board and then I'll be out. That'll be it. I'll be out. And the rest of the people on the board will have to pick that up and run with it. But we're trying to design our turnover of posts to be a planned succession so that there is continuity. And that is hard to achieve. But once you achieve a certain degree of stability, people are more happy to come on board. When they don't think they're going to have something awful dropped in their lap, they're happier to come along for the ride. So yeah, it's all about planning and thinking ahead, really.
I have a slightly related question to this, I hope, at least. I think that kind of these big projects are also ways of keeping volunteers engaged, not only members engaged, but especially volunteers engaged. And I'm thinking specifically of the big lobbying day, Corrine, that you had with ATA in at the US Congress. So I don't know, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And I'm sure Sarah has sort of similar ideas or similar things that the ITI have been doing.
Yeah, sure. So as I said earlier in the conversation, one push that ATA has been getting from our members in the past few years is to do more sort of high-level advocacy and lobbying for the language professions, and of course by association for ATA, but really for the language professions as a whole, to talk about why the work we do is important, why our work matters. So when we had our annual conference in Washington, D.C., which was this past October, so ATA belongs to a lobbying organization called JNCL, the Joint National Committee for Languages, and they have a lobbying day. JNCL has its own lobbying day every year, which is usually in February. So working with them, we have the idea, or maybe they had the idea, anyway, an idea was generated to have an ATA, we called it Advocacy Day. So what this was JNCL made appointments with the congressional delegation, senators and representatives, of anyone who wanted to attend. And then they put together 3 briefing documents for us on sort of critical issues for the language professions, and trained everyone on, how do you meet with a congressional staffer? And in some cases, our people actually got to meet with the actual Congress people, which was really exciting. But the expectation is that it would be a staffer, and talk to them about these issues that are important to the language professions, such as, appropriate use of machine translation, how to select language services based on best value rather than lowest price, things like that. So we had 50 people attend, and I can't remember how many different states were represented, but we had 50 attendees total. And even in the midst of, everything else that is being thrown in front of the US Congress, the reception to our message was extremely positive. I mean, perhaps it's that it's something more pleasant to talk about. I don't know, maybe now would be a good time to approach the UK government, because it's something more pleasant to talk about. But the people who attended felt that they were very well received, and that our message was very well received. So it's actually something that we are looking into doing again, because I think it was a great experience for the 50 people who attended, and the reception that we got from our members when we publicized it in the ATA magazine and things like that was extremely positive. So that is definitely a direction that we're going to continue going in, which is really a pretty new thing for ATA. And I will say as well, that is an impetus that came from our members, that is something that I think has historically not been a huge part of what ATA did. And we saw from our members that there was a real need and a demand and an expectation that we do that, because of the, size and credibility of the message when we are all together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got a slightly different sort of environment at the moment in the UK, that partly because of the uproar over public service interpreting as austerity, and the Ministry of Justice contracts basically almost decimated that area here, and there is. It's very hard to be heard right now by government. And
just out of curiosity, Sarah, in the UK, are your governmental representatives obligated to meet with you? Because in the US, they are. I should say that's something that in the US makes it a lot easier, is that, the halls of Congress are public, and if you make an appointment, your representative staffers are actually obligated to meet with you.
Yes, I mean you can get access to your local MP, and we have had people sort of write to local MPs, but the issue right now is that it's very hard to convince people of the relevance of translation and interpreting at the moment. I've had several conversations where as soon as I say what I do, I get the glaze over, because it's not a priority right now. And I think it's something, like I said earlier, that will be a priority in a couple of years' time, when people realize they actually need language services. At the moment, other concerns come first. So it's a hard message to get right at the moment, and we're working in ITI on getting the messaging, basically bypassing government at the moment and going direct to the people who are going to need the services, and talking to them about how to work with translators and interpreters. Because in government, you've got this rather strange situation where the Ministry of Justice is one thing, and that's police and court interpreters, and then the Foreign Office and anything diplomatic, well, they do all their training in-house themselves. The military, all of their language services are done in a very closed way due to secrecy requirements, etc. So you don't have one approach. It's a very sort of sectioned off sector. And we've had discussions with military linguists who've expressed their reservations about the way the military does things, but that's the way they do it. And that's kind of that's where the conversation has gone. We've talked with the diplomacy services, and they train their high-level diplomats in languages in a certain way, and that's the way they do it. So it's a difficult conversation to have, but we need to keep plugging on with that one. Now, in the meantime, we're going to go directly to the people who are going to buy services and talk to them.
I think it's almost time to wrap this up, even though it's been, of course, a lovely conversation with all of you. But before we kind of get into the wrap up of this whole thing, I actually have a question for Alex Drexel. Because, of course, you are a staff interpreter, and I think we've heard a lot about associations and what they do for freelance interpreters and translators around the world. But why did you actually decide to join a professional association, and why do you think it's important for staffers or even employed translators somewhere to join?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Alex. No, I mean, the truth is,
I figured.
The truth is, I think I've always been a member of a professional association, even as a student, because I just figured it would be a good idea. It just made sense to me for many reasons that we've discussed. I mean, because of the networking, getting to know colleagues, and because of the training opportunities and all of that, and also because I wanted to volunteer at some point. So there was that. And as a staff interpreter, many people say, yeah, I mean, it's not worth it, or why do you even bother being a member? But I don't think that's true. I mean, first of all, there's a slightly specific situation, because IIC, which is the International Association of Conference Interpreters, is very much involved in negotiating the working conditions that we have at the European institutions. And those, of course, do not only apply to freelancers, but also to staff interpreters. So it makes complete sense, from my point of view at least, to be a member of IIC and to support that, because, of course, working conditions are very important for us. And also it's... I think that the fluffy feeling of solidarity, if you know what I mean. So just being part of a community, I guess, and supporting that community, and also volunteering. So I do a little bit of volunteering work in IIC as well, and I used to do in the VKD, where I was a member before. So I think those would probably be the big reasons, really, that sense of community, and very practically also the whole point about negotiating our working conditions. And plus, of course, it's lovely to meet other colleagues working in this field that I don't necessarily meet every day, because they work in other institutions or they're on the private market or whatever. It's a good opportunity also to network worldwide, and meet interpreters from around the world that you wouldn't usually meet, but that you can meet during the sort of assemblies, or where the whole association gets together every 3 years. I think that would be the main reasons for me.
Good reasons, I would say. So everybody who hasn't joined an association, listen up and go out and join. Right. So I think as a wrap up, what we can do, if you're up for it, Corrine and Sarah, I think it would be nice for you guys to just sort of give an elevator pitch, if you will. And it can either be about why an interpreter should care about joining either the ATA or the ITI, or if that's not your cup of tea, what would you kind of like to let your members or potential members know? So what would you kind of like to say to them now that you have this soapbox of podcasts?
I'm not quite sure who your audience are, but I would suggest to anybody that they join the associations that seem relevant to them right now. I wouldn't say to join any particular one, because it will depend on your independent, your own place, where you are in your profession, where you are in your career, and you may well find that your associations may not be the ITI or the ATA. It may well be that it's IIC, or it may well be that it's some other association. It really does depend on your individual position. However, I would suggest that you join one in your source language country, etc., and one in your target language country, if you can, because that way you can be aware of both sides of the argument, both sides of development. So a rather broad answer, I'm afraid, not particularly ITI oriented.
That's fine. We'll allow it.
Yeah.
Corrine, what is your take?
Yeah, so I guess I would say, if I were going to give a message to ATA's current membership, or even current and prospective membership, it would be, we are stronger together. There is, as we all know, a lot of uncertainty in the language professions right now in the US. I just saw a statistic that over 90% of our current job growth is in jobs that are freelance or independent contractor, don't provide a guaranteed income or paid vacation or health insurance or any of the benefits that employees get. And so I think to face all of those challenges, we are undoubtedly better off sticking together. And I think specifically for, it's kind of an American thing to do a sales pitch, right? So I'll do a sales pitch here. Sarah refrained, but I'm not going to. So if you're within the sound of my voice and you're not an ATA member, joining the ATA can, for you guys who live in Europe and you'd be interested in working in the US market, we give you access to the US market. You get a listing in our directory. You can meet interpreters who work in the US market who might need someone to team up with to work a conference. And I think even if you don't want to travel, US-based clients who are going to the UK, let's say they're going to meet some German investors in London, they might be looking for a good liaison interpreter to help them, and they might look in the ATA directory for such a person. So I think that that we offer both kind of feel-good advantages and advantages that show up in your bank account.
Now, if that's not a great sales pitch, I don't know what is.
They don't pay me the big bucks for nothing.
Love it.
I think this is the thing. One of the things that I thought would be good to end on is the fact that if you're not in an association, there's no one watching your back.
Yes, that's a great.
And I think one of the reasons why I love ITI is that someone's watching your back and that someone's listening, and that there are people like you around who get you and have the capacity, not necessarily always the time, but have the capacity to do something. And this is the thing. It's a case of the world is unstable. You need a ship that's going somewhere. Pick one.
I like that. I like ships anyway, so that was a good metaphor. Okay, then let's wrap this up. I mean, we could have gone on forever, I guess. There were lots of topics that we could have.
You guys ask great questions.
You give good answers.
You ask great questions.
Exactly. But a podcast can only be that long. And I think we've come to the end for today, at least. So first of all, thank you so very much to Corrine and Sarah for being on the show. It was great to have you.
Well, thank you.
And I think it's fair to say that all three of us really, really appreciate your work and find it very inspiring, which is one of the reasons we had you on the show in the first place, of course. And I think if you didn't know, dear listener, that Jonathan, Alex, and I are big fans of associations and of being in an association, you should know by now. And, well, if you have any thoughts or comments on the topic of associations, if you agree with us or disagree with us, of course, please do get in touch. And there's several ways of doing that. You can do it online on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find us under Troublesome Terps. You can leave a comment on our website where you find all the episodes. So you can just leave a comment under this episode, for example, on troubleterps.com. And lastly, we have a live event coming up very, very soon, in the middle of November, and we are all three very much looking forward to this, because to this day, Jonathan, do you want to say it?
Jonathan, it's yours. That's your thing.
That's your shtick.
We have never actually been in the same room together. My theory is, and I've been telling people this theory, and people beginning to take me seriously, that the two Alex are just the same German guy who's very good at accents.
It's true.
So if you want to find out if there are actually two Alexes, that's another good reason to join us for the live event. You can learn more about that on our website, of course, troubleterps.com/live, and of course on our social media. So please watch this space. And that's it. Shall we say bye, everyone?
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
The most relaxed bit of the podcast is the bit where we know Alex has hit the button to turn the recording off. And everyone's like... I came across a translator recently who only translated text on concrete. Must have been a very hard specialism to get into. There's my pun of the day.